The Duke's mother invited her rival to tea. "My dear, you've already lost him." The carriage wheels ground against gravel as Thornfield Abbey materialized through the morning mist, and Evangelene Hartley pressed her gloved hand flat against the window glass, as if she might anchor herself to something solid. She had seen grand houses before, had entered them through servants' entrances and tradesmen's doors, had set up her easel in their finest rooms, while their inhabitants looked through her as if she were furniture. But nothing had prepared her for this. The abbey rose from the Derbyshire landscape like something dreamed rather than built, its honey-coloured stone glowing amber in the weak autumn sunlight. Twin towers flanked a central facade so perfectly proportioned that it seemed to have grown organically from the earth, and behind it she could glimpse gardens stretching toward a lake that reflected the steel-grey sky like a fallen mirror. It was the kind of house that had stood for centuries and would stand for centuries more, impervious to the small dramas of the humans who passed through its halls. Evangeline was acutely aware that she was one of those small humans, and that her drama was very small indeed. She smoothed her travelling dress, serviceable brown wool, chosen for practicality rather than fashion, and checked that her portfolio case was secure beneath the seat. The leather was worn at the corners, the brass fittings tarnished, but the contents were sound. Preliminary sketches, references, colour studies, everything she needed to complete the commission that would pay her rent for the next 6 months, and perhaps, if she was very careful with the funds, allow her to purchase the vermilion pigment she had been coveting at the art supplier's shop on Bond Street. The carriage lurched to a stop before the main entrance, and a footman appeared, as if conjured from the stones themselves. His livery was immaculate, his expression carefully neutral, in that way servants perfected when greeting guests whose status was uncertain. Evangeline knew she occupied an uncomfortable category, not servant, not truly guest, but something in between. An artist, a professional, a woman who worked for her living and did not apologize for it. "Miss Hartley?" The footman's voice betrayed nothing. "Her Grace is expecting you in the blue drawing-room, if you'll follow me." She followed. The entrance hall alone could have swallowed her entire London lodging-house. Marble floors stretched toward a staircase that swept upward in graceful curves, and portraits lined the walls, ancestors of the Ashworth family, she presumed, their painted eyes following her progress with aristocratic disdain. She made mental notes as she walked, the quality of light falling through the tall windows, the particular shade of blue in the silk wallpaper, the way shadows pooled in corners. Habit. She observed everything, always, cataloguing the world in terms of colour and composition. The blue drawing-room earned its name honestly. Wedgwood blue walls, sapphire velvet furniture, azure Chinese vases flanking a white marble fireplace. Against this sea of blue, the Dowager Duchess of Thornfield sat enthroned in a wing-back chair, her silver hair perfectly dressed, her black mourning silks pristine despite being at least 3 years out of date for a widow of her standing. Evangeline understood immediately that the mourning was a choice, not an obligation, a statement, a reminder to everyone who entered this room that she was still the Duchess of Thornfield in all the ways that mattered, regardless of what titles the law might assign to younger women. "Miss Hartley." The Dowager did not rise. "You are precisely on time. I approve of punctuality in tradespeople." The words landed like small, precise blows. Evangeline absorbed them, kept her expression pleasant, and dropped into a curtsy that was correct without being obsequious. "Your Grace, I'm honored to receive your commission." "Sit." The Dowager gestured toward a chair positioned just far enough away to require Evangeline to raise her voice slightly, a power play so subtle it was almost admirable. "Tea will be brought. We have matters to discuss before you begin your work." Evangeline sat, keeping her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap. She had learned long ago that nothing disarmed aristocratic condescension quite like perfect composure. Let them search for cracks in her armor. They would find none. "I have studied the preliminary information you sent," Evangeline said. "The portrait is to be a gift for Lady Arabella Vance, I understand, upon the occasion of her engagement to His Grace." "Upon the occasion of their engagement, yes." The Dowager's lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. "Though the engagement has not yet been formally announced, the portrait will serve as encouragement, motivation, a reminder to my son of his duties." Something in her tone made Evangeline's instincts prickle, but she kept her face serene. "I see. And the dimensions you specified? 3/4 length? Traditional pose?" "Traditional pose, yes. My son requires all the tradition he can be surrounded by." The Dowager's pale eyes, grey, like morning frost, fixed on Evangeline with unsettling intensity. "You come highly recommended, Miss Hartley. Lord Ashton was most effusive about the portrait you completed for his family." "Lord Ashton was a generous subject. He said you captured something true, that you saw past the surface to something essential." The Dowager leaned forward slightly. "Is that your method? Seeing past surfaces?" Evangeline chose her words with care. "I attempt to paint what I observe, Your Grace. Nothing more." "How modest! How very proper!" The knot smile again. "Tell me, Miss Hartley, do you find my son handsome? In a purely aesthetic sense, of course. An artist's evaluation." The question was a trap. Evangeline could smell it. "I have not yet had the pleasure of meeting His Grace." "No, but you have surely seen engravings, society pages. He is considered quite the catch, my son. Wealthy, titled, powerful, and yes, handsome, in that brooding way some women find appealing." The Dowager's voice dropped to something almost conspiratorial. "Every unmarried woman in England has set her cap at him at one time or another. Lady Arabella has simply proven the most persistent. I wish them every happiness." "Do you?" The Dowager studied her as one might study an insect under glass. "How remarkably selfless. Tell me, Miss Hartley, and do be honest. I can smell dishonesty from across a room. Have you ever been in love?" The question struck like a blade between ribs. Evangeline kept her breathing steady through force of will alone. "I don't see how that is relevant to the commission, Your Grace." "Everything is relevant when one is painting a portrait. Isn't that so? The artist must understand emotion to capture it, must have experienced longing to render it in oils and canvas." The Dowager's smile finally arrived in full, and it was not pleasant. "But perhaps you are one of those practical creatures who has no use for such feelings. Perhaps your heart is as sensible as your dress." Before Evangeline could formulate a response that would not end her commission before it began, tea arrived. Silver service, delicate china, an array of small cakes and sandwiches that probably cost more than Evangeline earned in a month. She accepted a cup, sipped, and used the ritual to rebuild her composure. "You will stay in the East Wing," the Dowager continued, as if the previous conversation had never happened. "Your meals will be brought to your room unless you are specifically invited to dine with the family. Sittings will occur in the gallery. The light there is acceptable in the afternoons. My son has been informed of his obligations and has agreed to cooperate." A pause. "Eventually." "Eventually?" "Sebastian finds these things tedious. He will likely avoid you for the first several days. Consider it a test of your persistence." The Dowager set down her teacup with a decisive click. "I suggest you use the time to familiarize yourself with the house. Study the family portraits. Understand what you are attempting to capture before you put brush to canvas." It was a dismissal. Evangeline rose, curtsied again, and followed the footman to her rooms. The east wing was beautiful in the way that lonely places often are, all graceful proportions and quality furnishings, with an air of abandonment that suggested few guests had occupied these rooms in recent years. Evangeline's chamber was larger than her entire London apartment, with tall windows overlooking a formal garden and a four-poster bed draped in cream silk that made her feel like an imposter just looking at it. Her trunk had been delivered and unpacked by invisible hands. Her painting supplies had been arranged in an adjoining room with north-facing windows. The Dowager, whatever her flaws, understood the requirements of an artist. Evangeline checked her pigments, examined her brushes, and found everything in order. She should begin preliminary work. Color studies, sketches of the setting. Instead, she found herself wandering. The house revealed itself slowly as she walked, a puzzle of corridors and chambers that told stories in architecture. Here, a medieval core with thick stone walls and narrow windows. There, Georgian additions with their perfect symmetry. And everywhere, that particular atmosphere of wealth so old it had forgotten how to announce itself. No guilt, no ostentation, just quality so assured it needed no advertisement. She found the portrait gallery almost by accident, following a shaft of light through an unmarked door and emerging into a long room lined with paintings. Generations of Ashworths gazed down at her from gilded frames, their features recurring like themes in a symphony, those grey eyes, that stubborn jaw, that particular set of the shoulders that seemed to say, "I belong here, and you do not." Evangeline moved slowly along the gallery, studying each portrait with professional attention. Technique, composition, use of light. Some were masterful, clearly the work of court painters at the height of their powers. Others were merely competent, but even the lesser works told her something about the family they depicted. She stopped before a family portrait dated 1798. A previous Duke Sebastian's father, she assumed, based on the resemblance, stood in rigid formality, one hand on the back of a chair in which a beautiful woman sat holding a very small child. The Dowager, before she was a dowager. And the child. Evangeline stepped closer, examining the brushwork. The child's face was rendered with technical precision, but no warmth. And there was something in the composition, something that nagged at her trained eye. The boy was positioned between his parents, but slightly apart from both, as if the artist had been unable to find a way to connect him to either figure. His small hand reached toward his mother's arm, but did not quite touch it. His eyes, grey even then, she could tell looked not at the painter, but somewhere beyond the frame, searching for something the portrait could not contain. She moved to the next painting. Same boy. Older now, perhaps 8 or 9. Same slightly disconnected positioning. Same searching look. And again in the next portrait, and the next. A pattern emerging that broke her heart with its subtlety. A child who had never quite learned how to belong to his own family. "Studying my ancestors?" The voice came from behind her, and Evangeline spun to find herself facing a man who could only be the Duke of Thornfield himself. He was taller than she had expected, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained the seams of a coat that probably cost more than her annual income. Dark hair swept back from a face that was handsome in the way classical statues were. Handsome, technically perfect, emotionally remote. But it was the eyes that caught her, held her, refused to let her look away. Grey as thunderclouds, grey as winter mornings, grey as the stone walls of this house that had shaped him. And tired. So unutterably tired that it made something ache behind her ribs. "Your Grace," she curtsied, hoping the movement would hide the flush climbing her cheeks. "I was familiarizing myself with the house, as your mother suggested. I apologize if I've intruded." You have not intruded. This gallery is open to guests. His gaze swept over her, assessing without warmth. You are the painter. Miss Evangelene Hartley, Your Grace. The painter, he repeated, as if her name were irrelevant. My mother's latest scheme to civilize me. A portrait as an engagement gift, she says, as if Lady Arabella has any particular desire to stare at my face for the rest of her days. Evangeline kept her voice neutral. Most subjects find the experience of sitting for a portrait more pleasant than they anticipate. Do they? It was not a question. And what experience do you anticipate, Miss Hartley? Days of my sullen silence? Complaints about the tedium? The gradual realization that you have been hired to flatter a man who has no interest in being flattered? I don't flatter my subjects, Your Grace. The words came out sharper than she intended, and she saw his eyebrows rise fractionally. Good. He expected deference, expected her to cower. She would give him neither. I paint what I see. If you dislike what I see, that is your concern, not mine. A long pause. Something flickered in those grey eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of respect. You have teeth, he observed. My mother usually chooses more pliable creatures. I am not a creature your mother chose. She commissioned a portrait. She will receive a portrait. What happens between now and then is between painter and subject. And what happens between painter and subject, Miss Hartley? Truth, Your Grace, whether either party wishes it or not. He studied her for a moment that stretched into eternity. She felt herself being weighed, measured, catalogued, and realized with a start that he was looking at her with the same intensity she used when examining a potential subject. They were both observers, she understood, both trained to look past surfaces. The recognition should have been unsettling. Instead, it felt like finding a door where she had expected only walls. The first sitting is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, he said finally. 2 o'clock. The light in here is best then. Your mother mentioned you might postpone. Did she? That almost smile again, but different from his mother's, less predatory, more sardonic. My mother mentions many things. Not all of them are true. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the long gallery. Evangeline watched him go, noting the tension in his shoulders, the rigidity of his spine. A man carrying invisible weight. A man who had learned very young to protect himself and had never unlearned it. She turned back to the childhood portrait, to that small boy with searching eyes. I see you, she thought, and I suspect you would rather not be seen. It was going to be a complicated portrait. But he did postpone. Not once but twice, sending brief notes of apology that managed to sound more like commands than regrets. Urgent estate business. A tenant dispute requiring his attention. Could she possibly reschedule? Evangeline could. She used the time as his mother had suggested, familiarizing herself with the house and grounds. She explored the formal gardens with their geometric precision, the informal gardens with their carefully crafted wildness, the kitchen gardens where practical vegetables grew in prosaic rows. She sketched the lake at dawn, all silver and shadow. She catalogued the quality of light in different rooms at different hours, making notes for the portrait. And she found the conservatory. It was tucked behind the main house, connected by a covered walkway that had seen better days. The glass panes were clouded with grime, and when she pushed open the reluctant door, the smell that greeted her was of decay and damp rather than growing things. Whatever had once flourished here had been abandoned long ago. Dried brown stalks rose from ornate pots. Dead vines clung to rusting trellises. The central fountain had run dry, leaving only mineral stains to mark where water had once danced. In one corner, a single rosebush clung to life, its leaves yellowed and spotted, but stubbornly present. Evangeline knelt beside it, touching one fragile leaf with gentle fingers. She loved this place. Evangeline startled, but did not quite jump. The Duke stood in the doorway, his figure silhouetted against the brighter light of the walkway. "Your Grace, I apologize." "Stop apologizing for existing in spaces you have every right to occupy." He stepped inside, his footsteps raising small clouds of dust from the flagstones. "My grandmother planted this garden. Roses, jasmine, orchids. She had specimens from every continent. She used to bring me here when I was a child, taught me to pot seedlings, to graft branches." He stopped beside the dying rosebush, his expression unreadable. "After she died, my mother had the staff reduced. The conservatory was deemed unnecessary." Evangeline heard what he did not say, that his grandmother's passion had been deliberately left to wither because it represented something the Dowager wanted forgotten. "This rose might be saved," she said carefully, "with the right care." "Might it?" He did not look at her. "And what would be the point, to preserve one struggling specimen when everything else is gone?" "The point would be that something survives, that all this," she gestured at the ruined garden, "was not entirely in vain." He turned then, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Not anger, not the cold. Dismissal she had expected. Something raw, something that looked almost like hunger. "You speak like someone who has lost things, Miss Hartley." "Everyone has lost things, Your Grace." "Not everyone speaks of loss with such recognition." She should have deflected, should have retreated into professional neutrality, reminded him of the boundaries between painter and subject. Instead, she heard herself say, "My father died 2 years ago. He was all the family I had. So yes, I recognize loss. I live in its landscape daily." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was something else entirely, a shared space, a moment of unexpected connection between two people who had forgotten how to connect. "I was sorry to hear of your father's passing," he said finally. "James Hartley was a master. His portrait of the Kensington family is exceptional. You know his work?" "I made it my business to know when my mother informed me she had commissioned his daughter." A pause. She hoped I would object, find reasons to dismiss you. Your father's reputation is complicated in certain circles. The old wound throbbed, but Evangeline kept her voice steady. "My father made mistakes. He paid for them. And you continue to pay for them. Every day." She met his gaze without flinching. "But I pay with my work, not with shame. I am not my father, Your Grace. I am only myself, trying to continue what he taught me with more wisdom than he possessed." Something shifted in his expression. The walls did not come down. She suspected those walls had been decades in the building and would not fall easily. But a small window opened, a crack in the stone. "Tomorrow," he said. 2 o'clock. I will be there, Miss Hartley. I give you my word. I will hold you to it, Your Grace." He almost smiled. "I believe you will." He kept his word. At precisely 2 o'clock the following afternoon, Evangeline stood before her prepared canvas in the portrait gallery, her palette laid out, her brushes arranged, her nerves stretched tight as violin strings. The light fell through the tall windows exactly as she had planned, creating a pool of luminescence that would catch the planes of his face and the fine wool of his coat. He arrived without ceremony, striding through the door as if this were any other obligation rather than an exercise in vulnerability. Because that was what portrait sitting was, whether subjects understood it or not. They were offering themselves to be seen, truly seen, and translated into something permanent. "Where would you like me?" She gestured to the chair she had positioned, a carved oak piece, with enough presence to suit a duke, but enough simplicity to avoid overwhelming the subject. "There, please. Turn slightly toward the windows. Yes, like that. Chin up just a fraction." He moved with surprising obedience, though she caught the tension in his jaw, a man submitting to necessity, not enjoying it. "You may speak, if you wish," she said, beginning the preliminary sketches that would guide her work. "Many subjects find silence uncomfortable. Do you find it uncomfortable? I am accustomed to it. My work is largely solitary." "That sounds lonely." She glanced up, surprised by the observation. "It suits me." "Does it? Or have you simply convinced yourself it does? Because the alternative, admitting you desire company, would require vulnerability you cannot afford." The accuracy of the assessment stole her breath. She covered by returning attention to her sketch. "We are not here to discuss my vulnerabilities, Your Grace. No, we are here to discuss mine, though neither of us will admit that is what we're doing." He shifted slightly, and she corrected his position with a gesture. "Tell me, Miss Hartley, what do you see when you look at me? Not the Duke, not the title, or the house, or the fortune. What do you actually see?" The question was a challenge, and she met it directly. "I see exhaustion. I see someone who has been performing for so long that he has forgotten which parts of him are real and which are armor. I see intelligence that frightens people, so you hide it behind coldness. And I see—" She paused, considering whether to speak the truth. "Go on." "I see the boy in those portraits, the one standing slightly apart from his parents, the one looking for something beyond the frame." The silence that followed was absolute. She watched his face, saw the struggle between the instinct to retreat and something else, curiosity perhaps, the desire to be known, warring with the terror of it. "You see too much," he said finally. "That is rather the point of being a painter." "Is it?" He leaned forward slightly, breaking the pose she had established. "And what if I see you equally clearly, Miss Hartley? What if I observe a woman who has learned to make herself useful rather than ornamental because she believed ornament was all anyone wanted from women? Who has convinced herself that independence is virtue rather than acknowledging it as armor against the risk of dependence? Who paints others' truths to avoid examining her own?" Evangeline's hand trembled, and she set down her charcoal before he could see. "You are remarkably perceptive for a man trying to avoid being perceived. I have had a great deal of practice observing from a distance." His voice softened almost imperceptibly. "It is easier than participating." "Yes," she agreed. "It is." They looked at each other across the space between easel and chair, and something passed between them that Evangeline could not name. Recognition, understanding, the terrible intimacy of being truly seen by someone capable of comprehending what they saw. She was the first to look away. "We should continue. The light will change soon." He settled back into the pose, and she returned to her sketching, but the air in the room had altered. They had crossed a threshold without meaning to, and there was no returning to the safe distance of painter and subject. The sitting continued for 2 hours. They spoke of inconsequential things, the estate's history, a tenant dispute he was mediating, her thoughts on contemporary portrait techniques, but beneath the surface conversation, another dialogue was occurring. Every glance held weight. Every silence said more than words. When the light finally softened too much to continue, Evangeline set down her charcoal with genuine reluctance. "That will suffice for today, Your Grace. Tomorrow, same time?" "Tomorrow." He rose, and she realized he had been sitting perfectly still for nearly 2 hours, a discipline that spoke to his willingness to submit to this process, whatever he might claim about finding it tedious. "Miss Hartley?" Yes? He paused at the door, his profile silhouetted against the fading light. The conservatory. You said the rose might be saved. Would you... That is, do you know anything about plants? About saving them? A little. My father kept a small garden on our London roof. Impractical, but he insisted. He said artists needed growing things to remind them that creation was always possible. Would you show me? What might be done? It was such a small request, and it was enormous. I would be honored, Your Grace. Sebastian. The name emerged as if against his will. When we are not in public, when it is just... when we are working. Sebastian. She should refuse. Should maintain the boundaries that protected them both. Instead, she heard herself say, Then you must call me Evangelene, when we are working. Evangelene. He spoke her name as if tasting it, and she felt the syllables reverberate through her body like music. Until tomorrow. He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone in the gallery with her sketches and her racing heart, and the certain knowledge that she was in terrible danger. The days that followed took on a rhythm that felt increasingly natural and increasingly dangerous. Mornings, Evangelene worked in her studio, translating sketches into the underpainting that would guide the portrait's development. Afternoons, she sat with Sebastian in the gallery, ostensibly working while actually... what? Talking, revealing, connecting in ways she had sworn she would never connect with anyone. He told her about the estate, the weight of generations pressing down on every decision. She told him about her father's studio, the smell of linseed oil and turpentine that still meant home. He described his grandmother's letters, which he kept in a locked drawer and read when the loneliness became unbearable. She confessed that she still wore her father's paint-stained waistcoat when she worked, because it made her feel less alone. They did not speak of Lady Arabella. The engagement that was not yet an engagement hung between them, unmentioned, a ghost in the gallery. And in the evenings they met in the conservatory. Evangelene taught him what she knew: how to prune dead wood, how to amend soil, how to identify what a plant needed by the color of its leaves. Sebastian listened with an intensity that suggested he was learning something far more important than horticulture. Together, they coaxed the dying rosebush back toward health, their fingers brushing as they worked the earth, their voices low in the dusty silence. "My mother believes this conservatory is an embarrassment," he said one evening, carefully watering a cutting they were attempting to root. "Evidence of my grandmother's eccentricity. She wanted it demolished after the funeral. What stopped her? I did." His jaw tightened. "One of the few times I have openly defied her. I was 15. I told her I would leave, run away, go to sea, anything if she touched my grandmother's garden. She called my bluff, of course, knew I would never actually abandon my responsibilities, but she let the conservatory stand." He looked around at the ruined space. "She simply let it die instead, a slower punishment for my defiance." Evangeline's heart clenched. "And you blame yourself for not being able to save it?" "I blame myself for many things, Evangelene." The use of her name, still rare, still precious, made her breath catch. "Sebastian, don't!" He held up a soil-stained hand. "Don't offer comfort. I do not know what to do with comfort." "Then I won't comfort. I will simply observe that you were a child trying to protect something you loved from a woman who saw love as weakness. The failure was not yours." He looked at her then with an expression she could not read, or rather, could read too well. Hunger, hope, terror. "You should be careful," he said softly. "Speaking to me like that, looking at me like that. I am not a safe person, Evangelene. I have been taught my whole life that love is a transaction, that vulnerability is a weapon others will use against me. I do not know how to be any different." And yet you are being different. Right now. With me. Yes. The word seemed to cost him something. And it terrifies me. She should have retreated. Should have remembered her own vows, her own armor, her own certainty that she would never need anyone the way her mother had needed her father. Instead, she reached out and laid her hand over his, where it rested on the edge of a terracotta pot. It terrifies me too. The moment stretched between them, fragile as new growth, trembling with possibility. Sebastian! The Dowager's voice shattered the silence like glass. There you are. I have been searching everywhere. Lady Arabella's carriage has arrived. They sprang apart, guilty as children caught stealing sweets. The Dowager stood in the doorway, her expression sharp with satisfaction, and Evangeline understood with sickening clarity that this interruption was not coincidence. The Dowager had been watching, waiting, playing a game whose rules Evangeline did not understand. Lady Arabella. Sebastian's voice had gone cold, all warmth vanishing behind the ducal mask. Of course. If you'll excuse me, Miss Hartley. Miss Hartley, not Evangeline. The demotion hurt more than it should have. Of course, Your Grace. He left without looking back. The Dowager remained, her smile small and cruel. A word of advice, Miss Hartley. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Do not mistake my son's attention for affection. He is lonely, and you are convenient. When Lady Arabella has secured his commitment, you will be forgotten. Save yourself the humiliation of hoping otherwise. I hope for nothing, Your Grace. Liar. The word was almost gentle, but a clever one. I almost admire you. She turned to leave, then paused. There will be a tea tomorrow, a formal welcome for Lady Arabella. You will attend. Me? Your Grace, that would hardly be. You will attend, the Dowager repeated. As my guest. I wish Lady Arabella to see the portrait's progress. Surely you cannot object to displaying your work. It was a trap. Evangeline could smell it, taste it, feel its jaws preparing to close. But she could not refuse without giving the Dowager exactly what she wanted: evidence of fear, of weakness, of inappropriate attachment. Of course, Your Grace, I would be honored. The Dowager smiled. I thought you might be. Lady Arabella Vance was everything Evangeline was not, and she entered Thornfield Abbey like a conquering general claiming territory. Tall, slender, with porcelain skin and hair so black it shone blue in certain lights, she moved through the world with the absolute assurance of a woman who had never questioned her place in it. Her gowns were the latest Paris fashion. Her jewels were discreet but genuine. Her laugh was musical and practiced and utterly devoid of warmth. Evangeline watched her from across the blue drawing-room, acutely conscious of her own brown wool dress, her paint-stained fingernails hastily scrubbed, her hair that refused to hold its pins. She had been placed strategically close enough to observe, far enough to emphasize her outsider status, and she understood that her presence was itself a message. See what he has been reduced to, conversing with artists, visiting ruined gardens, forgetting his place. Sebastian stood beside Lady Arabella, performing his role with the ease of long practice. He smiled at appropriate moments, offered compliments with mechanical precision, guided her through the room with a hand that never quite touched her waist. A perfect duke, a perfect future husband. He did not look at Evangeline, not once. She told herself this was proper, told herself she was grateful for his discretion, his recognition that whatever had passed between them in the conservatory must remain private, told herself that the ache in her chest was merely indigestion from the elaborate tea service. Miss Hartley. The Dowager appeared at her elbow, voice pitched to carry to nearby guests. Do tell Lady Arabella about the portrait. She is most eager to see it. Suddenly, Evangeline was the centre of attention, and Lady Arabella's dark eyes fixed on her, with polite curiosity that did not quite mask the assessment beneath. "You are the painter," Lady Arabella said. Not a question. "Mother mentioned you. Your father was James Hartley, was he not? Such a tragedy. What happened?" The words were a stiletto, slipped between ribs with a smile. Evangeline kept her own smile steady. "My father taught me everything I know. I am proud to continue his legacy." "How admirable. And you paint portraits professionally, for income?" "I do." "How very modern." Lady Arabella's laugh was a tiny tinkling thing. "I confess I cannot imagine having to work, to sell one's talents on the open market like a common tradesman. It must be terribly draining." "It is honest work, Lady Arabella. I find honour in that." "Of course you do. What else could you find?" Lady Arabella turned to Sebastian, linking her arm through his with proprietary ease. "Sebastian, you must show me the gardens before the light fades. I have heard such remarkable things about the maze." Sebastian's gaze flickered finally to Evangeline. Something passed between them, too quick for anyone else to catch. Apology. Pain. The impossibility of their situation rendered in a single glance. "Of course," he said, already turning away. "This way." Evangeline watched them go, and the ache in her chest sharpened into something she refused to name. "My dear." The Dowager's voice came from beside her, soft as poisoned silk. "You've already lost him." Evangeline's heart stopped. "I beg your pardon?" But the Dowager was not speaking to her. She was looking across the room to where Lady Arabella stood frozen in the doorway, her arms still linked with Sebastian's, her face pale as marble. The Dowager had pitched her voice to carry exactly as far as she intended, far enough for Arabella to hear, far enough to wound. "You've already lost him," the Dowager repeated, and now her smile was triumphant. "His heart is engaged elsewhere, whether he admits it or not. I give you perhaps a month before he finds a way to end this understanding without formally breaking his word. You may as well prepare yourself." Lady Arabella's composure cracked for just an instant, rage, humiliation, calculation flickering across her perfect features before the mask resettled. "We shall see, Your Grace. We shall see." She swept from the room, dragging Sebastian with her. The Dowager's laughter followed them, low and satisfied. And Evangeline stood frozen, understanding finally too late the game she had been playing a part in without knowing. The Dowager had not brought her here merely to paint a portrait. She had brought her here as a weapon, a lure, an unsuitable woman with whom Sebastian might develop feelings, thereby making Lady Arabella's position untenable. It was not about securing a match for her son. It was about control, about proving that she could manipulate everyone around her, including the son who had defied her over a conservatory 15 years ago. Evangeline was a pawn. She had always been a pawn. And somewhere in the process of being used, she had fallen in love. She found him that night in the conservatory, long after the house had gone quiet. He was on his knees beside the rose bush, his coat discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up, dirt beneath his fingernails as he worked the soil around the fragile roots. "You know," she said quietly. He did not look up. "I know many things. You'll have to be more specific. What your mother is doing, why she brought me here, the game she's playing with Lady Arabella and with you." Now he looked up, and his eyes held such weariness that it stole her breath. "I have always known. I have known my mother's methods since I was old enough to understand that love, in her vocabulary, means control. That care means manipulation. that every kindness comes with strings attached. Then why? Evangeline's voice cracked. Why did you let it happen? Why did you with me? Because for one moment, one single impossible moment, I wanted to pretend it was real. He rose to his feet, dirt falling from his hands. I wanted to believe that I might be capable of something besides duty and obligation, that I might feel something besides the cold and the pressure and the endless performance. You made me believe that, Evangeline, whether my mother intended it or not. But it cannot be real. You are promised to Lady Arabella. I am not promised. There is no engagement, only understanding, expectation, the weight of what everyone assumes will happen. He stepped closer, and she saw that his hands were trembling. I could end it. I could tell my mother and Lady Arabella and the whole of society that I will not be moved, that I have found— Don't. The word tore from her throat. Don't say it, because if you say it, I might believe it. And then what happens when the reality sets in? When you remember that I am a painter's daughter with a ruined reputation? When your mother finds new ways to punish you for defying her? When society closes its doors to a duke who married so far beneath him? You are not beneath me. The world believes otherwise, and the world is very difficult to fight. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. His palm was rough with garden work, warm against her cold fingers. I have fought everything my whole life, he said quietly. Fought my father's indifference, and my mother's control, and my own conviction that I am somehow unworthy of love. But I am tired of fighting, Evangeline, tired of performing, tired of pretending that the cold is all I am capable of feeling. Sebastian, stay. The word broke from him like a confession. I know I have no right to ask. I know this is impossible and foolish and will probably end in disaster. But stay. Finish the portrait. Give me time to find a way. Give me time to become the man who deserves you. She should say no. Every rational thought in her head screamed for her to gather her things and leave this house tonight before she fell any deeper into a dream that could only end in waking. But his hand was warm in hers, and his eyes held hope, and the dying rosebush between them had begun to show new growth. "I'll stay," she whispered. "For now, I'll stay." His smile was like sunrise after endless night, tentative, uncertain but real. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." She squeezed his hand, then released it. "We are standing in the ruins of a garden your mother deliberately destroyed to punish you for loving it. Do not underestimate what she is willing to do." "I never have." His jaw tightened. "But I have also never had anything worth protecting. Not really. Not until now." They stood together in the darkness of the abandoned conservatory, surrounded by dead things and one small struggling rose, and Evangeline felt the foundations of her carefully constructed independence begin to crack. She should leave. She should protect herself, as she had always done, armor up, and walk away before the wound became too deep to survive. But his hand found hers again in the darkness, and she could not make herself let go. The portrait was coming alive beneath her brushes, and that terrified Evangeline more than anything else. 3 weeks had passed since Lady Arabella's arrival at Thornfield Abbey, 3 weeks in which Evangeline had learned to navigate a landscape more treacherous than any she had previously encountered. On the surface, everything proceeded with propriety. She painted. Sebastian sat. Lady Arabella floated through the house on clouds of expensive perfume, attending teas and dinners and garden parties as if the engagement were already settled. The Dowager watched everything with the patient satisfaction of a spider who has spun her web and now awaits her prey. but beneath the surface currents moved that threatened to drag them all under. "Hold still," Evangeline murmured, dabbing ochre into the shadow beneath Sebastian's jaw. "You keep tensing." "I am not tensing. You are. Your shoulders have climbed nearly to your ears in the last 10 minutes. Something is troubling you." He exhaled slowly, deliberately relaxing the muscles she had identified. "Lady Arabella wishes to set a date for the announcement. She has written to her mother suggesting a Christmas engagement with a spring wedding to follow." The brush trembled in Evangeline's hand. She steadied it through force of will. "I see. I have not agreed, but you have not refused. Refusing requires explanations. Explanations require truths I am not yet prepared to speak aloud." His grey eyes met hers across the canvas. "Not because I doubt them, but because speaking them will set in motion events I cannot control. And you do so love control." "I love very little, Evangeline, but what I love completely." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither would acknowledge directly. "I need time. Time to disentangle myself from expectations, to arrange matters so that my defiance does not destroy everything I am responsible for. The estate, the tenants, the hundreds of people who depend on the Thornfield name. Yes." His voice was tired. "I am not free in the way ordinary men are free. Every choice I make ripples outward, affecting lives I will never see. If I break with Lady Arabella carelessly, her family will retaliate through society, through business, through the 1,000 small cruelties the powerful can inflict on those who displease them, and my mother." He stopped, jaw tightening. "Your mother will find ways to punish anyone you care for." "Yes." Evangeline set down her brush, abandoning the pretense of work. "Then perhaps we should stop this. Whatever this is, perhaps we should return to painter and subject, nothing more, and let the currents carry us where they will." "Is that what you want?" "What I want is irrelevant. I am a portrait painter, Sebastian. I have no family to protect, no fortune to preserve, no position in society that your mother's malice could damage more than it already has. But you— I want you." The words fell like stones into still water, and the ripples spread outward, touching everything. "Sebastian, I want you," he repeated, rising from his chair with sudden energy, crossing the space between them in 3 long strides. "I want your paint-stained fingers and your sharp tongue and the way you see through every mask I wear. I want to argue with you about brushwork and spend hours in that damned conservatory getting dirt under my fingernails. I want to wake up beside you and fall asleep beside you and grow old beside you, and I am tired of pretending otherwise." He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could see the rapid pulse in his throat, the slight tremor in his hands, the fear beneath the declaration. This was not a man accustomed to wanting things for himself. This was a man who had been taught that desire was weakness, that love was a weapon, that vulnerability invited destruction, and he was offering her all 3. "You are promised to another woman," she whispered. "I am promised to nothing but duty and expectation. Lady Arabella must know that there is no love between us. Our arrangement was always political, strategic, a merger of families rather than a meeting of hearts. She may be angry when I break it off, but she will recover. She will find another duke, another title, another position to satisfy her ambitions. And your mother? My mother will rage. She will threaten and manipulate and attempt to destroy everything I care for." His hand rose, hovering near her cheek without quite touching. "But I have spent my entire life accommodating her rage, and it has brought me nothing but emptiness. Perhaps it is time to discover what defiance might bring instead." Evangeline closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his palm near her skin, the impossible temptation of everything he was offering. She had sworn she would never need anyone the way her mother had needed her father. She had built her entire life around self-sufficiency, around the certainty that depending on another person was the surest path to destruction. And yet, "I watched my mother die of grief," she said quietly, eyes still closed. "After my father passed, she simply stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring whether she lived or died. Within 6 months, she was gone. The physician said it was her heart, but I knew the truth. Her heart had died with him. She had loved so completely that she could not survive the loss. Evangelene. I swore I would never be that vulnerable, never love anyone so much that their absence would destroy me. I built walls, Sebastian, perhaps not as high as yours, but just as deliberate. And now you are asking me to tear them down, and I do not know if I can survive what comes after." His hand finally made contact, cupping her cheek with devastating gentleness. "I am not asking you to tear down your walls. I am asking you to build a door in them, a door that only I have the key to, a door you can close again if I prove unworthy." She opened her eyes. His face was so close, his grey gaze so intent, his whole being focused on her, with an attention that made her feel seen in ways she had never experienced before. "And if I cannot close it? If the door becomes a wound that never heals? Then we will be wounded together, and perhaps that is better than being safe alone." She should have argued further, should have found reasons, obstacles, impossibilities to throw between them. Instead, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, and the world fell away. The kiss was tentative at first, two people who had forgotten how to want learning the language again. His hands trembled where they cradled her face, her fingers twisted in the fabric of his coat, anchoring herself against the dizziness that swept through her. He tasted of tea and hope and the particular sweetness of things too long denied. When they finally broke apart, both breathing ragged, his forehead rested against hers. "Tell me this is real," he whispered. "Tell me I am not dreaming." "If you are dreaming, then so am I, and I do not wish to wake." The sound he made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob, and then he was kissing her again, and she was kissing him back. And the portrait stood forgotten on its easel, while two people who had believed themselves incapable of love discovered they had been wrong all along. They were careful after that, so careful. In public, nothing changed. Evangelene continued her work on the portrait. Sebastian continued his courtship of Lady Arabella. The Dowager continued her machinations. To all outward appearances, the house party proceeded exactly as intended, with an engagement announcement growing ever closer. But in private, everything had changed. They stole moments where they could. Early mornings in the conservatory, when the household still slept, and they could work side by side in the growing garden, their fingers brushing as they transplanted seedlings. Late evenings in the portrait gallery, where Evangelene made minute adjustments to the painting, while Sebastian read aloud from his grandmother's letters, sharing pieces of himself he had never shown anyone. Whispered conversations in shadowed corridors, lasting only seconds, but carrying the weight of hours. Sebastian arranged for her to receive invitations to events that would normally have excluded a woman of her station, claiming her presence was necessary for the portrait's accuracy. The Dowager permitted these intrusions with visible satisfaction, clearly believing her strategy was proceeding exactly as planned. Let the painter fall in love with the Duke. It would only make her eventual dismissal more painful, and pain was a lesson the Dowager believed in teaching. But the Dowager did not see what Evangelene saw. She did not witness Sebastian's transformation in these stolen moments, the way his shoulders lost their rigid tension, the way laughter came more easily, the way his grey eyes warmed from winter ice to something softer. She did not understand that her son was not merely infatuated with an unsuitable woman. He was rediscovering parts of himself that had been buried so long he had forgotten they existed. "You are changing," Evangeline observed one night as they sat together in the conservatory, the restored rosebush now blooming between them. She had brought her sketchbook, ostensibly to work, but really to capture this version of him, the Sebastian who smiled without irony, who touched growing things with gentle hands, who existed beyond the Duke's mask. "Am I?" "You are. The servants have noticed. 2 of them have commented to me that you seem lighter, less forbidding." "Forbidding?" He grimaced. "Is that truly how they see me?" "You have cultivated that perception deliberately. Do not pretend surprise that it took root." "I suppose not." He reached out to touch a rose petal, marveling at its softness. "I have been forbidding my entire life. It was safer than being vulnerable. But safe and happy are not the same thing, are they?" "No, they are not." "I begin to understand what my grandmother tried to teach me in this garden, that growing things require patience and care, that you cannot force a bloom. You can only create conditions where blooming becomes possible." He looked at her, and his eyes held something that made her breath catch. "You have created those conditions for me, Evangeline. Whatever happens, I will always be grateful for that. Nothing is going to happen. Something always happens. My mother is too skilled a manipulator to let this situation continue indefinitely. She will act eventually, and we must be prepared." He was right, of course. Evangeline had felt the Dowager's attention sharpening over the past weeks, had caught calculating glances that suggested patience wearing thin. The game was approaching some kind of endgame, though she could not yet see its shape. "What do you propose?" "I have been writing letters. To my solicitors, to my man of business, to certain allies in Parliament. Arranging matters so that if my mother attempts to use her financial leverage against me, she will find that leverage considerably reduced." He smiled grimly. "It has taken years to quietly redirect certain investments, to establish accounts she does not control, to create a position from which I can defy her without destroying the estate. I had always planned to use this freedom eventually. I simply did not know what I wanted to use it for." "And now you do?" "Now I do." He took her hand, raising it to his lips. "I want to marry you, Evangeline. Not in spite of the obstacles, but in full awareness of them. I want to stand before God and society and my infernal mother and declare that I choose you above duty, above expectation, above everything I was raised to believe was important." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Sebastian, I know you are not ready to answer. I know there are still walls between us, doors you are not certain you can open. I am not asking for a response tonight. I am simply telling you what I want, so that when the time comes, and it will come, soon you will know where I stand." She could not speak. The magnitude of what he was offering, what he was risking, stole her voice. This was not a casual declaration. This was a duke proposing to marry a portrait painter with a scandalous family history, in full knowledge that doing so would alienate his mother, damage his social standing, and potentially make him the object of ridicule in every drawing-room in England. And he did not care. For her. He did not care for her. She had never felt so valued in her life, and she had never been more afraid. The dinner party was meant to be a celebration of Lady Arabella's name day, an intimate gathering of 40 guests who would witness the Duke's particular attentions to his intended bride. The Dowager had orchestrated every detail, the seating arrangements that placed Sebastian at Arabella's side, the menu that featured all of Arabella's favorites, the musicians engaged to play her preferred pieces. Evangeline was not invited. Of course she was not invited, but she had been commanded to display the nearly finished portrait in the gallery, where guests could view it before dinner. a calculated humiliation forcing her to stand beside her work, while aristocrats examined both painting and painter with equal condescension. She dressed carefully, choosing her best gown, still hopelessly unfashionable, still obviously the work of a woman who mended her own clothes, and arranged her hair with more attention than usual. If she must be displayed, she would not be ashamed of what they saw. The portrait itself was perhaps the best work she had ever done. Sebastian gazed out from the canvas with all his complexity intact, the ducal authority, yes, but also the weariness, the intelligence, the unexpected capacity for tenderness. She had painted what she saw, as she always did. But what she saw now was so much more than what she had seen at the beginning. Guests drifted through the gallery in twos and threes, examining the portrait with the practiced eye of people who owned many paintings and valued few. Evangeline heard murmured compliments. Quite a likeness. She has captured something of him, hasn't she? But also the whispered judgments she had learned to expect. Her dress was remarked upon, her unmarried state, the unfortunate business with her father. She weathered it all with the composure of long practice, until a voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. Miss Hartley. Lady Arabella stood before her, magnificent in cream silk and family diamonds, her dark eyes glittering with something that was not quite anger, but was certainly not kindness. What a remarkable portrait! You have made Sebastian look almost human. I paint what I see, Lady Arabella. Do you? How interesting. Because what I see when I look at my intended is a duke, a man of power and position and family honor stretching back centuries. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so that only Evangeline could hear. And when I look at you, I see a woman who has forgotten her place, who has been permitted certain liberties as a courtesy to her profession, and has mistaken those liberties for something more significant. Evangeline's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. I'm afraid I don't understand your meaning, Lady Arabella. Don't you? Then let me be plain. Arabella's smile was all teeth. I know about the conservatory. I know about the evening walks and the whispered conversations, and the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. Did you imagine you were being discreet? Ice flooded Evangeline's veins. Lady Arabella, do not trouble yourself with denials. They would only be tedious. Arabella examined her gloved fingertips with studied casualness. The Dowager has been most forthcoming about your role in this household. You are a distraction, Miss Hartley. A temporary amusement designed to make Sebastian appreciate what is appropriate by presenting him with something that is not. When the novelty wears off, and he will return to his senses and his duty. You sound very certain. I am certain. Arabella's eyes met hers, and the triumph in them was absolute, because I know something you do not, something that will change everything. And when that something comes to light tomorrow, perhaps, or the next day, you will leave Thornfield Abbey in disgrace, and Sebastian will be so consumed with fury at your betrayal that he will marry me simply to prove he is beyond your reach. Fear coiled in Evangeline's stomach, but she would not let this woman see it. I have done nothing worthy of disgrace. Haven't you? Arabella's laugh was soft and cruel. We shall see, Miss Hartley. We shall see. She swept away, cream silk rustling, leaving Evangeline frozen before her own portrait, her mind racing through every possible interpretation of what she had just heard. Something that will change everything. Your betrayal. What betrayal? She had done nothing wrong. She had painted a portrait, yes, and in the process had fallen in love with her subject, But that was not a crime, was not even particularly scandalous given the circumstances. She had been careful, discreet, proper in all public interactions. What could they possibly accuse her of? The answer came to her hours later, after the dinner guests had departed and the house had fallen silent, when she found a folded note slipped beneath her door. "Come to the study. Immediately. S." The tone of the note sent dread spiraling through her. This was not the voice of the Sebastian who kissed her in shadowed corridors, who read her his grandmother's letters, who looked at her as if she had hung the moon. This was the Duke, cold, commanding, furious. She went. The study was lit by a single lamp, casting harsh shadows across Sebastian's face as he stood behind his desk. He did not look at her as she entered. His attention was fixed on a sheaf of papers spread before him, letters, she realized as she drew closer. Letters in a familiar hand. Her hand. But not her letters. "These were delivered to me an hour ago," Sebastian said, his voice flat, dead, "by an associate of my mother's, a man who claims to be the editor of a society gossip column in London. He says you have been his correspondent for several weeks, that you have been feeding him information about this household, my household, in exchange for payment." "That is a lie." The words came out strangled. "Sebastian, I never—" "The letters are in your handwriting." He finally looked up, and his eyes were winter ice, all the warmth of the past weeks frozen solid. "I know your handwriting, Evangeline. I have watched you write notes and sketch annotations and sign correspondence. This is your hand. They're forgeries. They must be. I never wrote those letters. I never spoke to any gossip columnist. I never— Did you imagine I would not find out?" The pain beneath his anger was worse than the anger itself, a raw, bleeding wound exposed. "Did you think you could sell my secrets and continue to share my bed without consequence?" "I never shared your bed, and I never sold anything to anyone." Desperation cracked her voice. "Sebastian, please. You know me. You know I would never—" "I thought I knew you." He picked up one of the letters, reading aloud in a voice like broken glass. "The Duke is entirely under my influence now. He shares confidences no man should share with a mere portrait painter. His mother's manipulations, his dead grandmother's letters, his pathetic attempts to grow roses in the abandoned conservatory. He tells me everything, and I dutifully report it to your column. The payment you mentioned will be most welcome. My father's debts continue to weigh upon me, and I find I am willing to sell almost anything to be free of them." Evangeline's legs gave way. She sank into a chair, staring at him, unable to process the magnitude of what was happening. Someone had forged her handwriting. Someone had created an elaborate fiction of betrayal and presented it as truth. And Sebastian, who had been betrayed before, whose fiancé had eloped with his closest friend, who had spent his entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Sebastian believed it. "I did not write those letters," she said, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. "I swear to you on my father's grave, on everything I have ever loved, I did not write them. Your father—" His laugh was bitter. "Yes, let us speak of your father, the man who forged a painting to pay his debts. Forgery runs in the family, it seems." The blow landed with devastating precision. All the air left her lungs, all the fight left her body. "If you can believe that of me," she whispered, "then you never knew me at all." "Perhaps I didn't. Perhaps I saw what I wished to see, an honest woman in a world of manipulators, a pure heart in a sea of corruption." He crumpled the letter in his fist. "I wanted so badly to believe in something, in someone. I should have known better. Belief is for fools, and I am done being foolish." She should defend herself, should rage, argue, present evidence of her innocence. But what evidence could she offer against forged letters in her own hand? Against a man already primed by history to expect betrayal, against a lifetime of walls that had come down too quickly and were now slamming back into place with brutal finality. Your mother did this. The words came out flat, empty. Or Lady Arabella. Perhaps both together. They created false evidence because they saw what was happening between us and could not allow it to continue. How convenient. Blame my mother, the eternal villain. Blame Arabella, the jealous rival. Everyone is at fault, except you. I am not at fault because I did nothing wrong. The letters are forgeries, created by someone who studied my handwriting, who knew enough details of our private conversations to make them convincing. She rose on unsteady legs, facing him across the desk, across the chasm that had opened between them. But you don't want to believe that, do you? Because believing that would mean trusting me over your own mother. It would mean accepting that the woman who raised you is capable of this kind of cruelty, and you would rather believe I am a fortune-hunting schemer than face that truth. His jaw tightened. You know nothing of my mother. I know she let your grandmother's garden die to punish you for loving it. I know she chose Lady Arabella not because she would make you happy, but because she is pliable, manageable, controllable in ways I am not. I know she has spent your entire life teaching you that love is weakness and vulnerability is death. And I know, her voice cracked, I know that you are proving her right now, by choosing fear over faith. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had been and everything that could never be. Sebastian's face was a mask of stone, his eyes revealing nothing, his whole being locked behind walls she could no longer breach. Pack your things, he said finally. The carriage will be ready at dawn. You will leave Thornfield Abbey, and you will not return. Sebastian, do not. His voice was ice. Do not say my name. We are strangers, Miss Hartley. We have always been strangers. I simply forgot it for a while. She should have argued, should have fought. But the man standing before her was not Sebastian, not the Sebastian who had held her in the conservatory, who had asked her to build a door in her walls, who had promised they would be wounded together. This was the Duke. Cold, impervious, gone. Very well, Your Grace. She heard her own voice as if from a great distance. I will leave, but before I go, answer me one question. He said nothing, but he did not turn away. When you look at that portrait, the one I painted with all my heart, with all my skill, with all the truth I have ever possessed, what do you see? His gaze flickered to the painting, then away. I see a man who believed in something and was proven a fool. I see weakness I should have hidden. I see everything I never wanted anyone to see, captured in oils and preserved for posterity. His voice dropped to a whisper. I see the biggest mistake I have ever made. She absorbed the words like physical blows. Then, slowly, with all the dignity she could summon, she curtsied. Then you are right, Your Grace. We are strangers. Because the man in that portrait, the man I painted, would never have spoken to me as you are speaking now. Good night. She walked to the door. Her hand was on the handle when his voice stopped her. Evangelene. She did not turn around. Yes? A long pause. She heard him draw breath, heard the words form and die unspoken. When he finally spoke, his voice was empty. Nothing. It does not matter now. She left without looking back. Dawn found her in the main hall, her trunks packed, her painting supplies crated, her heart a hollow thing in her chest. The footman who had greeted her upon arrival now stood ready to escort her to the carriage, his expression carefully neutral, despite the curiosity that surely burned beneath. She had not slept. How could she sleep when everything she had begun to believe in had shattered? She had spent the night sitting by her window, watching the stars wheel overhead, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly become foreign and hostile. The forged letters, the perfect handwriting, the intimate details of conversations that only she and Sebastian had shared. Someone had been watching, listening, gathering information to use at precisely the right moment. Someone with access to the household, with knowledge of her writing style, with motivation to destroy whatever was growing between her and the Duke. The Dowager. It had to be the Dowager. But she had no proof. And even if she had proof, Sebastian would not believe it. He had chosen his mother's narrative over Evangeline's truth, and that choice told her everything she needed to know about the depth of his wounds, the strength of his walls, the impossibility of the future she had briefly allowed herself to imagine. "Miss Hartley?" She turned. A young woman in a maid's uniform stood hesitantly at the edge of the hall, one of the housemaids, Evangeline recalled, who had brought her morning tea and tended her fire. "Yes?" The girl glanced around nervously. "I shouldn't be here, miss. I could lose my position, but I couldn't let you leave without—" "Without what?" The maid's hands twisted in her apron. "I saw something, miss. Something I wasn't meant to see. Her Grace the Dowager. I mean, she had papers in her sitting room 3 days ago, and one of the other maids, Sarah, was copying from them. From a sample of your writing a note you'd written to the housekeeper about extra candles, I think. Sarah was copying your hand over and over, practicing until she could make it look just like yours." The world tilted. Evangeline reached for the wall to steady herself. "You saw this? You're certain?" "I saw it, miss. And then yesterday, Lady Arabella came to the Dowager's rooms, and they were laughing together, talking about how everything was going perfectly, how you'd be gone by morning, and His Grace would never know the truth." The maid's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, miss. I should have said something sooner. I should have warned you, but I was scared. I need this position. My family needs the income." "It's all right." Evangeline's voice was steady despite the turmoil inside her. "It's all right. You're telling me now. That's what matters. Will you tell His Grace? Will you show him the truth?" The question hung in the air. Evangeline thought of Sebastian's face in the study, the ice in his eyes, the walls that had slammed closed against her. She thought of the years he had spent learning not to trust, the betrayals that had shaped him, the mother who had taught him that love was weakness. She thought of the man in the portrait, the man who had begun to heal, the man she had loved. "No," she said finally. "I will not. But, miss, the truth means nothing if it must be proven to be believed. If His Grace cannot trust me without evidence, if he requires a servant's testimony to believe I am not a schemer and a spy, then what kind of love is that?" She shook her head slowly. "I want a man who chooses faith over fear, who looks at me and sees truth without requiring proof. If Sebastian cannot be that man, then no amount of evidence will make him so." The maid stared at her with something like awe. "You would leave, just like that, knowing you could clear your name?" "I would leave knowing that he believed the worst of me with such readiness, knowing that his wounds matter more to him than his heart." Evangeline picked up her small travel bag, the last of her possessions not yet loaded into the carriage. "If he ever learns the truth, and he may, in time let him reckon with what he has done. Let him understand what he threw away because he was too afraid to believe in something beautiful." "Miss Hartley, thank you." She reached out and squeezed the maid's hand. "For telling me, for risking your position to give me this truth. I will not forget it." She walked toward the main entrance, where the carriage waited in the grey morning light. The footman held the door. The horses stamped impatiently. And somewhere behind her, in a study filled with forged letters and shattered dreams, the Duke of Thornfield sat alone with his certainty. She was halfway to the carriage when she heard running footsteps behind her. "Evangeline!" Her heart stopped. She knew that voice, knew the desperation in it, the raw edge of fear. Sebastian. She did not turn around. "Evangeline, please, wait." Still she did not turn. Her hand found the carriage door, steadied herself against it. "The maid." His voice was ragged, breathless. "She came to me. Just now. She told me she showed me God, Evangeline. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought—" "You believed the worst of me." Her voice was calm, dead. "You thought I was capable of betrayal because betrayal is all you have ever known. You chose fear over faith, Sebastian. You chose your mother's narrative over your own heart. I was wrong." He was close now, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him at her back. "I was so wrong. Please, let me explain. Let me—" "Explain what?" She finally turned, and the sight of him nearly broke her. His hair was disheveled, his coat half-buttoned, his eyes wild with remorse. He looked like a man who had been through a war in the hours since she had left his study. "Explain that you looked at me, the woman who painted your soul onto canvas, who held your hand in your grandmother's garden, who opened doors in her walls because you asked her to and saw a liar, a schemer, a woman willing to sell your secrets for coin." I was afraid. The words were wrenched from him. "I was terrified of how much you had come to mean to me. When those letters appeared, when I saw your handwriting, all I could think was that it was happening again, that I had trusted and been betrayed, just like before. My mother's voice was in my head, telling me that everyone wants something, that love is always a lie, that I was a fool to believe otherwise." "And so you believed her? Over me?" "Yes." He did not try to defend himself. "Yes, I believed her. Because believing her was easier than facing the alternative, that she had manufactured evidence to destroy the only real happiness I have ever known. And now that a servant has confirmed what I told you from the beginning, now I see what a coward I am. What a fool. I had the truth standing before me, swearing on her father's grave, and I chose fear over faith because faith required courage I did not possess." He reached for her hands, and she let him take them, too exhausted to resist. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not sure I deserve it. But I am asking for a chance to prove that I can be better, that I can learn to trust, that I can become the man you painted on that canvas." "You believed the worst of me with such readiness." Her voice cracked on the words she had spoken to him once before, in another context, with different pain. "What kind of love is that?" "A broken kind, a wounded kind." His grip on her hands tightened. "But love nonetheless, Evangeline. I love you. Despite my fear, despite my walls, despite everything I was taught to believe about the impossibility of love. I love you, and I nearly destroyed that love because I could not trust it." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She did not try to stop them. "I cannot be with a man who will always be waiting for me to betray him. I cannot spend my life proving and reproving my worth every time your mother manufactures some new lie." I know. He released her hands, stepped back. "And I am not asking you to. I am asking for time. Time to confront my mother, to demand truth from her, to reckon with everything she has done to shape me into this suspicious, fearful creature. Time to learn how to trust without evidence. Time to become worthy of you. And in the meantime, what am I to do while you learn these lessons? Live your life, paint your portraits, be the extraordinary woman you have always been. His voice steadied, found resolution. "I will come to you. When I have done the work, when I have become someone capable of the faith you deserve, I will come to you, and I will ask again. And if you have found happiness elsewhere, if you have decided that waiting for a broken duke is not worth your precious time, I will understand. I will accept it. But I will have tried, at least. I will have tried to be better." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the boy in the portrait gallery, the lonely child searching for something beyond the frame. Saw the man in the conservatory, learning to tend growing things. Saw the duke in the study, choosing fear because trust had never been safe. Saw all of him, loved all of him, and knew that love was not enough. Not yet. "Come to me, I will." His voice was a vow. "I swear it." She turned and climbed into the carriage. The door closed behind her. The horses began to move. Through the rear window, she watched Sebastian standing in the drive, growing smaller and smaller as the distance between them widened. He did not move, did not wave, simply stood, watching her leave, his face a study in loss and determination. The carriage rounded a bend, and he disappeared from view. Evangeline closed her eyes, pressed her hand against the ache in her chest, and tried to remember how to breathe in a world that had changed completely in the span of a single night. The road to London stretched before her, empty and uncertain. Behind her, Thornfield Abbey receded into the mist. And somewhere between them, in the space where love and fear battled for supremacy, a door remained neither open nor closed, waiting to see which force would ultimately prevail. Winter came early to London that year, wrapping the city in grey wool clouds and bitter winds that rattled windows and drove pedestrians into their collars. Evangeline barely noticed. She moved through her days like a woman walking under water, each motion requiring conscious effort, each interaction conducted through layers of protective distance. Her studio, a cramped set of rooms above a milliner's shop on the unfashionable street, became her refuge and her prison. She painted with fierce determination, accepting every commission that came her way, filling her hours with work so she would not have to fill them with thought. Portraits of merchants' wives, of solicitors who wanted their importance immortalized, of children who squirmed and grandmothers who dozed. She painted them all with technical precision and emotional remove, and if her clients noticed that her work had lost some indefinable quality, they did not mention it. The portrait of Sebastian remained unfinished in the corner of her studio, covered with a cloth she never lifted. She could not bear to complete it, could not bear to add the final touches that would transform it from a work in progress to a finished piece. Completing it would mean acknowledging that the chapter was closed, the story ended, the door finally shut. And despite everything, despite the accusations, the readiness to believe the worst, the wounds both given and received, she was not ready to close that door. Not yet. Letters arrived in the weeks following her departure from Thornfield Abbey. Not from Sebastian, she had not expected letters from Sebastian, but from sources that painted a picture of events unfolding in her absence. A gossiping acquaintance mentioned that Lady Arabella had departed Thornfield suddenly, the engagement that never was now definitively never to be. A patron who moved in aristocratic circles reported that the Dowager Duchess had been seen less and less in society, her influence apparently waning. A fellow artist spoke of a duke who had become even more reclusive than before, refusing all invitations, appearing at only the most essential functions. She told herself she did not care, told herself that Sebastian's struggles were his own, that she had done what she could, that the rest was up to him. But at night, when sleep eluded her and the wind howled against her windows, she found herself remembering the conservatory, the fragile rosebush, the way his hands had trembled when he touched growing things. 3 months passed, then 4. The winter deepened, then slowly began to release its grip. Snowdrops appeared in the parks, crocuses pushed through frozen soil. The days lengthened by minutes that added up to hours, and still no word from Sebastian. She should not have expected it. He had promised to come when he was ready, when he had done the work of becoming someone capable of trust. Perhaps that work was taking longer than either of them had anticipated. Perhaps it would never be completed. Perhaps he had decided that the effort was not worth the outcome, that the painter's daughter was not worth the transformation she required. Perhaps he had simply forgotten her. On a grey March afternoon, as rain streaked her windows, and she struggled to capture the precise shade of a merchant's waistcoat, a knock came at her door. She set down her brush with irritation. She had not expected any visitors, and interruptions disturbed the fragile concentration she had learned to maintain, and went to answer it. The man standing in her doorway was not Sebastian, but he carried a letter bearing the Thornfield seal. "Miss Hartley?" The messenger's livery marked him as belonging to a noble household. "I am instructed to deliver this personally and await your response." She took the letter with numb fingers. The seal was unbroken, the paper heavy and expensive, the handwriting on the front. Not Sebastian's. A woman's hand, elegant and precise. The Dowager. Every instinct screamed at her to throw the letter in the fire unread. Whatever the Dowager wanted, it could not be good. This was the woman who had orchestrated her humiliation, who had forged evidence of betrayal, who had deliberately attempted to destroy her son's chance at happiness. Nothing good could come from communication with such a person. And yet the messenger waited. And yet the letter lay heavy in her hands. And yet some part of her, the part that still hoped, still believed, still refused to give up entirely, whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, this was something she needed to see. She broke the seal. "Miss Hartley, I write to you not to apologize. I am not convinced that apologies from one such as myself would be believed, but to inform you of certain facts you may wish to know. My son has spent the past 4 months dismantling everything I built. He has confronted me about the forged letters, about the maid who was persuaded to copy your handwriting, about the decades of manipulation that preceded this particular cruelty. He has removed me from all positions of influence over the estate. He has established me in the dower house with a generous income, but no power, no control, no ability to interfere in his affairs. I tell you this, not to elicit sympathy. I deserve none, but so that you will understand what I am about to say. My son is dying, not physically. His body remains healthy. But the man I raised, the cold, controlled duke who trusted no one and risked nothing, that man is dead. In his place is someone I do not recognize. Someone who tends a conservatory at dawn and reads poetry in the evenings. Someone who speaks to tenants as if they were equals and has dismissed half the senior staff for their complicity in my schemes. Someone who smiles at children and grieves openly for what he has lost. Someone who loves you still, perhaps more than ever. He will not come to you. He believes he has not yet earned the right. He sets impossible standards for his own transformation and then condemns himself for failing to meet them. He thinks he must become perfect before he can ask again for what he asked before. I am writing to tell you that he is wrong. He will never be perfect. None of us are. But he has become something he never was before. A man capable of recognizing his own failings, admitting his own wounds, choosing growth over stagnation. He has become someone who might, with time and patience and love, learn to trust without evidence. I do not know if that is enough for you. I do not know if anything could ever be enough after what was done in my name and with my blessing. But I know that my son is suffering, and for reasons I do not entirely understand, his suffering has become intolerable to me. Perhaps this is conscience, Perhaps it is merely the discomfort of watching my schemes bear fruit I did not anticipate. Perhaps I am simply old and tired and ready to see something other than destruction. Whatever the cause, I am asking you, a woman I wronged profoundly, to consider giving my son another chance. Not for my sake, for his, for the man he is becoming, rather than the man I made him. He will be at Thornfield this Easter. The conservatory has been fully restored. There is a rose bush that blooms now in all seasons, tended by his own hands. If you come, he will be there. If you do not, I will understand. We all will. Helena Ashworth, Dowager, Duchess of Thornfield. Evangeline read the letter twice, then 3 times. Then she set it down on her work table and stared at it as if it might transform into something comprehensible. The Dowager was asking her to come back. The Dowager, architect of her humiliation, forger of evidence, destroyer of trust, was advocating for her return. It made no sense. Unless 4 months of watching her son suffer had accomplished what a lifetime of his compliance never had. Unless the Dowager, stripped of power and forced to observe the consequences of her manipulation, had finally begun to understand what she had done, unless even the coldest hearts could learn to feel. Evangeline looked at the messenger, still waiting patiently in her doorway. Tell the Dowager. Tell her I will consider her words. That is all I can promise. The messenger bowed and departed. Evangeline closed the door, leaned against it, and tried to remember how to breathe. Easter was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to decide whether she could trust a woman who had proven herself untrustworthy. 3 weeks to determine whether hope was wisdom or folly. 3 weeks to choose between the safety of her London studio and the terrifying possibility of Thornfield Abbey. She looked at the covered portrait in the corner, at the cloth hiding Sebastian's face from view. Then she crossed the room, took hold of the fabric, and pulled it away. He gazed out at her from the canvas, not quite finished, not quite complete, but so achingly present that her breath caught in her throat. She had painted what she saw, as she always did. And what she had seen was a man capable of love, capable of growth, capable of becoming something other than what he had been taught to be. The question was whether she was equally capable. The carriage that brought her to Thornfield Abbey 3 weeks later was not the humble hired vehicle she had arrived in before. Someone, and she suspected she knew who, had sent a private coach to collect her, complete with the Thornfield arms on the door and servants in crisp livery. A statement of intent, an acknowledgement of status she had never claimed to possess. She had argued with herself for the entire journey, had listed reasons to turn back, to send word that she had changed her mind, to protect herself from the hope that bloomed, despite her best efforts to suppress it. 4 months was not very long. People did not change in 4 months. Sebastian's wounds were decades in the making. They would not heal because he wished them to. But the conservatory called to her, the rosebush that bloomed in all seasons, the man who tended it with his own hands, the man who loved her still. Thornfield Abbey materialized through spring mist, and she was struck anew by its beauty, though she noticed changes even from the drive. The formal gardens seemed softer somehow, less rigidly geometric. Flowering bushes dotted the lawns where only grass had grown before. And there, visible through newly cleaned glass, the conservatory gleamed like a jewel in the afternoon light. She had expected the Dowager to greet her, had steeled herself for that encounter, for the awkwardness of facing the woman who had wronged her so deeply. Instead, when the carriage door opened, she found only a footman. A new footman, she noted, not one she recognized from before. "Miss Hartley, His Grace is expecting you in the conservatory." Of course he was. She followed the familiar path through the house, noting more changes as she went. The oppressive formality had softened. There were flowers in vases where there had been none before, books left open on tables as if someone had set them down mid-read, evidence of life being lived rather than performed. Even the servants moved differently, with less rigid precision and more natural ease. Small changes, but significant ones. The conservatory door stood open, and the scent that reached her was nothing like the decay and damp she remembered. Growing things, blooming things, life reasserting itself against the death that had reigned before. She stepped inside and stopped, overwhelmed. The transformation was complete. Where dead stalks had risen from empty pots, now lush. Green growth cascaded from every surface. Roses climbed the restored trellises, red and pink and white and yellow, more varieties than she could name. Jasmine perfumed the air. Orchids glowed like jewels in carefully positioned displays. Herbs grew in neat rows near the windows, practical beauty beside the ornamental. The fountain ran again, its gentle music providing counterpoint to the bird songs that drifted in through windows open to the spring air. And there, kneeling beside the rosebush, she remembered the survivor, now glorious with blooms, was Sebastian. He had not heard her enter. He was focused on the soil, working something into it with careful fingers, his coat discarded, and his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. His hair was longer than she remembered, curling slightly at his collar. His shoulders had lost their rigid tension. His whole bearing spoke of a man at peace with his body, with his purpose, with himself. Sebastian. He turned, and his face, God, his face, the hope in it, the fear, the desperate love that he made no attempt to hide. He rose slowly, soil still clinging to his hands, and looked at her as if she might vanish if he moved too quickly. "You came." "I came. I wasn't sure my mother wrote to you. I know she did, though she refused to tell me what she said. I told her not to interfere, that I would come to you when I was ready, that I didn't want you pressured or manipulated ever again. Sebastian." She stepped closer, close enough to see the rapid pulse in his throat. "Stop talking." He stopped. She looked at him, truly looked, with a painter's eye and a woman's heart, and saw what the Dowager's letter had described. A man transformed, not perfect, never perfect, but different. Open in a way he had never been before, vulnerable without armor, present without masks. "You have been busy," she said, gesturing at the garden around them. "I had to do something with my hands, with my time, with the energy that had nowhere else to go." He looked around at his grandmother's restored sanctuary. It helped, working with living things, watching them grow despite my inexpert care, understanding that patience and attention and love can revive what seems dead beyond saving. A metaphor? Perhaps. Or perhaps just gardening. His lips quirked, almost a smile. I have had a great deal of time for metaphors, for reflection, for cataloguing all the ways I failed you and planning all the ways I might do better. And what have you concluded? That I was a coward, that I chose fear over faith because fear was familiar and faith was terrifying, that I looked at the woman I loved, the woman who had shown me more truth in weeks than I had experienced in a lifetime, and saw a potential traitor, because seeing a traitor was easier than believing in something good. He stepped closer, near enough now that she could smell earth and green growing things, and the particular scent of him beneath it all. I believed lies about you, Evangelene, not because the evidence was convincing, but because belief was a choice, and I made the wrong one. Yes, you did. I know. I have had 4 months to understand exactly how wrong that choice was. 4 months to confront my mother, to dismantle her influence, to examine every assumption she planted in me, and root out the ones that were poison. His voice dropped. 4 months to grieve what I threw away and hope that I might somehow earn it back. And have you earned it back? I don't know. That's not for me to decide. He met her eyes with unflinching honesty. I can tell you what I have done. I can tell you that I have changed. But only you can tell me whether that change is enough, whether the door you opened for me remains open, or whether I closed it forever with my faithlessness. She was silent for a long moment, feeling the weight of decision settle onto her shoulders. This was the moment, the crossroads, the choice that would determine everything that followed. "When I left Thornfield," she said slowly, "I told you to come to me when you could look at me and see truth without requiring proof, when you could choose faith first, before the fear had time to speak. I remember. Can you do that now? If another letter appeared tomorrow, another forgery, another manufactured betrayal, could you look at me and know, without evidence, that it was a lie?" Yes. No hesitation, no qualification, just the single word spoken with absolute conviction. "How can you be so certain?" "Because I have spent 4 months learning what happens when I choose fear, because I have lived with the consequences of that choice, and I know now that fear protects nothing, it only destroys. Because I would rather be wrong about you and suffer betrayal than be wrong about you and lose you again." He reached for her hands, stopped himself, waited for her permission. "Because I love you, Evangeline. And love, I have finally learned, requires faith. Not evidence, not proof, just faith." She looked at his hands, hovering near hers, waiting. She looked at his face, open and vulnerable and afraid. She looked at the garden around them, dead things brought back to life through patience and care and attention. She looked at the rosebush, the survivor, blooming now more beautifully than ever because someone had been willing to tend it through its dying. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Anything. I never stopped loving you. Through all of it, the accusations, the betrayal, the 4 months of silence, I never stopped. I tried, God knows I tried, but the heart does not take orders from the head, and my heart remained stubbornly, painfully, irrevocably attached to you. Evangeline, I'm not finished." She took his hands, finally, feeling the soil on his fingers and the warmth of his skin and the trembling that ran through him at her touch. "I never stopped loving you, but love alone is not enough. Love without trust is a beautiful agony, and I cannot live in agony, not even for you. I know. I understand. However," she tightened her grip on his hands, "I am willing to try, to see whether the man you have become is capable of the trust the man you were could not give, to test this transformation against reality rather than faith alone." "What does that mean?" "Practically, it means I will stay, for now. It means we will see each other, spend time together, learn each other again, without the pressure of house parties and scheming mothers and inappropriate audiences. It means we will build something, Sebastian, slowly, carefully, with patience and attention, and yes, love. And at the end of this building, what then?" She smiled and felt something shift in her chest, a door opening, a wall coming down, a weight lifting that she had carried so long she had forgotten it was not part of her. At the end, perhaps a marriage, perhaps a life, perhaps the kind of happiness that requires courage to claim. She released one of his hands, reached up to touch his face. "But we are not at the end yet. We are at the beginning, a new beginning, this time, built on truth rather than manipulation." He turned his head, pressed his lips to her palm. "I will not fail you again." You might. You are human and humans fail. But if you do, when you do, I need to know that you will choose to believe in me, to talk to me, to fight for us, rather than retreating behind walls. I will. I swear it. Then we have a foundation. She let her hand fall, but kept hold of his other hand. Show me the rest of the garden. Tell me what you have learned about growing things. And so he did. For hours, as the afternoon light shifted and softened, as the spring breeze carried the scent of flowers through the restored conservatory, Sebastian showed Evangeline what he had built in her absence. He told her about the roses, each variety, its history, its particular requirements. He explained his system for watering, for fertilizing, for knowing when a plant needed more light or less. He shared the setbacks, the orchid that had died despite his best efforts, the jasmine that had nearly succumbed to frost before he learned to protect it, with a rueful honesty that spoke to his changed relationship with failure. He was not the same man. She could see it in every gesture, every word, every unself-conscious moment of enthusiasm when he spoke about something that mattered to him. The walls were not gone entirely. They would never be gone entirely. Not after a lifetime of building, but doors had been cut in them, windows installed, light allowed to enter. He was becoming someone who could be trusted, someone who could trust. And she was becoming someone who could believe in him. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Evangeline had experienced before. She took up residence not in the East Wing where guests were housed, but in a comfortable suite near the main house, a position that signaled neither servant nor visitor, but something new, something they were inventing together. She brought her painting supplies, set up a studio in a room with magnificent north light, and returned to the portrait that had sat unfinished for so long. Completing it now felt different. She was not painting a memory or a hope, but a living, evolving man. Sebastian sat for her as he had before, but without the tension, the defensive coldness, the walls that had made the early sessions feel like a battle. Now he talked easily, laughed readily, asked her questions about her techniques, and listened to her answers with genuine interest. She painted what she saw, and what she saw now was infinitely richer than what she had seen before. The Dowager maintained her distance, residing in the dower house on the edge of the estate. Evangeline encountered her only twice in those first weeks, brief, awkward meetings that neither woman attempted to extend. But she noticed that Sebastian visited his mother regularly, that their conversations grew longer, that something was shifting there too. "She is not the woman I thought she was," Sebastian admitted one evening as they walked together through the gardens. "Or rather, she is exactly the woman I thought she was. Manipulative, controlling, incapable of expressing love normally, but I am beginning to understand why. Her own mother was crueler still. Her marriage to my father was a transaction she had no choice in. Everything she did to me, she believed she was doing for my benefit." "That does not excuse it." "No, but it explains it. And explanation, I am learning, is the first step toward forgiveness." He paused, looking out over the lake that reflected the sunset sky. "I am not certain I can forgive her fully. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But I can understand her, and that understanding makes it possible to have a relationship that is not built entirely on resentment. You have grown wise. I have had an excellent teacher." He took her hand, raised it to his lips. "A painter who showed me how to see truth, even when truth was uncomfortable, especially when truth was uncomfortable." The painting progressed. The relationship deepened. Spring turned toward summer, and Thornfield Abbey became a place of warmth and growth and hope. And one morning, 6 weeks after her return, Evangeline woke to find a letter slipped beneath her door. Sebastian's handwriting, finally, bold and direct and unmistakable. "Come to the conservatory at dawn. There is something I must ask you." She knew what the question would be, had known, perhaps, since the moment she stepped back into the garden of his grandmother's making, had known and waited, letting him find his way to it, letting him choose the moment rather than pressing. The conservatory at dawn was magical. Morning light filtered through the glass, casting everything in shades of gold and green. The fountain sang its quiet song. The roses glowed like captured sunlight. Sebastian stood beside the rosebush, the survivor, the first thing they had saved together, and in his hands he held a ring. "I had this made," he said as she approached, "from a rose that bloomed here, pressed and set in gold. It is not traditional. It is not what a duke should offer. But it is us, Evangelene. Everything we have built, everything we have become." She looked at the ring, delicate gold, with a tiny preserved rose encased in crystal at its center, and felt tears prick at her eyes. "You are not proposing on your knees." "No, I am proposing as an equal, as a partner, as a man who has learned that the woman he loves does not want a duke on his knees, but a companion at her side." "You have learned a great deal. I am still learning. I suspect I will be learning for the rest of my life." He took her hand, and his fingers were steady now, sure. "Marry me, Evangelene, not because I require a duchess, not because society expects it, not because my mother wishes it. God knows she has finally stopped wishing anything regarding my marriage. Marry me because we have built something real in this garden, because we have proven that we can tend growing things together, because I cannot imagine facing the rest of my life without you beside me." She looked at the ring, at the man, at the garden around them, testament to what patience and love and faith could accomplish. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." His smile was like sunrise, the same tentative brightness she had seen on that terrible morning when she had agreed to stay. But fuller now, more certain, radiant with a joy he no longer tried to hide. He slipped the ring onto her finger. He drew her close. And when he kissed her, surrounded by roses and jasmine and the morning light of a new day, she felt the last of her walls crumble into dust. They were no longer two people who had learned to survive alone. They were something new, something stronger, something that could only exist because they had both been willing to grow. 8 years later, the portrait gallery at Thornfield Abbey had undergone a transformation. The old paintings remained the ancestors, with their aristocratic disdain, the formal family portraits with their careful compositions, but they no longer dominated the space. New works hung beside them, vibrant and alive, capturing not positions and poses, but moments and emotions. A painting of Sebastian in the conservatory, soil on his hands and laughter in his eyes, their eldest daughter perched on his shoulders reaching for an orange from the tree above them. A painting of the 3 children, Edmund, Rose, and little James, tumbling in the informal garden, the family's ancient hound sprawled tolerantly beneath their play. A painting of the Dowager, older now and softer, seated in the garden of the dower house she had made her own, a grandchild on her knee, and an expression on her face that the Dowager of 8 years ago would never have believed possible. And in the place of honor, at the center of the wall, the portrait that had started everything. Sebastian, as Evangelene, had first seen him tired and guarded, and longing for something he could not name, with all the complexity and contradiction that had made her fall in love with him. She stood before it now, brush in hand, making the final adjustments to the newest edition. A family portrait, unlike any in the gallery's long history. No rigid poses here, no careful separations, no children standing apart from parents with searching eyes. This painting showed the family as they truly were, touching, laughing, connected, alive. "Are you nearly finished?" She turned to find Sebastian in the doorway, their youngest on his hip, their daughter's hand in his. Edmund, at 10, had declared himself too old for such escorting, but she could see him hovering in the corridor behind, pretending not to care while very obviously caring a great deal. "Nearly. Come and see." They gathered before the canvas, her family, her heart, everything she had once believed herself incapable of allowing. Sebastian studied the painting with the attention he had learned to give to art over the years, seeing not just the surface, but the meaning beneath. "You've made us beautiful," he said. "I've painted the truth, which is the same thing, in your hands." Little James squirmed in his father's arms, reaching for the bright colours on the canvas. Rose stood on tiptoe, pointing out details to her father with all the serious expertise of a 7-year-old who had grown up watching her mother work. And Edmund, who would one day be Duke, who was already learning the weight of that responsibility, stepped forward at last, dropping his pretense of disinterest. "You've put grandmother in it," he observed. "There, in the corner of the garden. She's part of our family. But she wasn't always kind to you. Father told me some of it." Edmund's grey eyes, his father's eyes, his grandfather's eyes, held questions beyond his years. "How can you paint her with love when she hurt you?" Evangeline considered the question seriously, as she considered all of Edmund's questions. He was growing into someone who would need to understand complicated truths, and she would not shield him from them. "Because people are capable of change. Because your grandmother did hurt me, badly, but she also changed. She learned. She became someone different than she was." She touched her son's shoulder. "And because forgiveness, I have learned, is not about pretending the hurt never happened. It's about choosing not to let that hurt define the future." Edmund pondered this. "Is that why Father keeps her portrait in his study? The one from before? Perhaps you should ask him." The boy turned to his father, who had been listening quietly with James, now drowsing against his shoulder. Sebastian met his son's gaze with the openness he had learned over years of practice. "I keep that portrait to remind myself of who I was," Sebastian said, "and who I might have remained, if someone had not been brave enough to see past my walls and believe in who I could become." He looked at Evangeline, and the love in his eyes was as powerful now as it had been on the day they married. "Your mother saved me, Edmund. Not from anything external, not from danger or villainy, but from myself, from the cold, closed-off man I had been trained to be. I keep that portrait so I never forget what her faith made possible." The children absorbed this in their different ways, Rose with solemn attentiveness, Edmund with thoughtful consideration, James with the obliviousness of a 3-year-old who had fallen asleep and was now drooling gently on his father's shoulder. "Can we go to the conservatory now?" Rose asked, the gravity of the moment apparently sufficient for her patience. "You promised we could help with the new seedlings." Sebastian smiled, the easy smile that still surprised visitors who remembered the Duke of Thornfield from before. "I did promise. Edmund, will you join us?" The boy nodded, his brief foray into philosophical discussion apparently complete. The 3 of them trooped off toward the conservatory, Sebastian carrying the sleeping James, Rose skipping ahead, Edmund following with the measured pace of a boy practicing to be a duke. Evangeline watched them go, then turned back to her painting. A few more brushstrokes, a highlight here, a shadow there, the small adjustments that transformed good work into great work. She thought about the title that had begun everything the Duke's mother invited her rival to tea, and how she had misunderstood it at first. She had thought she was the rival, had believed the Dowager saw her as a threat to be eliminated, a pretender to a position she had no right to claim. But she understood now that the rivalry had never truly been between herself and Lady Arabella, or even between herself and the Dowager. The true rivalry had been between fear and faith, between the closed hearts they had all cultivated, and the open hearts they were capable of becoming. "My dear, you've already lost him." The Dowager had spoken those words to Lady Arabella, but she might as well have been speaking to fear itself, to the cold, controlling, protective fear that had governed all their lives for so long. Fear had lost, not in a single dramatic moment, but slowly, gradually, through years of patient work and deliberate choice, through gardens tended and portraits painted, through children raised and relationships rebuilt, through the daily unglamorous practice of choosing trust over suspicion, faith over evidence, love over safety. Evangeline set down her brush and stepped back from the canvas. The portrait was finished. Their family, captured in oils and light, would hang in this gallery long after they were all gone. Future generations would look at it and see what she saw now. People who had learned that walls are not the same as safety, that vulnerability is not weakness, and that love, real love, transforms everything it touches. She heard laughter from the direction of the conservatory, Sebastian's deep voice, Rose's delighted squeal, Edmund's rare and precious chuckle, her family, alive and whole, and hers. She smiled, dried her brushes, and went to join them. The portrait could wait. Life was happening in the garden, and she had no intention of missing a moment of it.